Hello everybody! Welcome to Global Startup Connection, J Startups for NETZERO. Today is day one of the two-day online Global Startup Connection program. My name is Karen Kimura, and I will be your host. Without further ado, let's begin. At Global Startup Connection, startups are a driving force in innovation creation. Japan has recently seen the birth of many startups, including many wonderful startups that are commercializing cutting-edge technology. Global Startup Connection shares the initiatives of Japanese startups that contribute to carbon neutrality and the SDGs. Major companies promoting open innovation with startups and the potential of the startup ecosystem. During this conference, we will hear suggestions from investors, entrepreneurs, and business people from Japan and abroad. We hope it provides you with opportunities for collaborations that create a prosperous future. First, I will give a brief overview of the two-day Global Startup Connection program. On day one, today, September 9, we will begin with an opening speech from Mr. Kouichi MUNEKIYO, the Parliamentary Vice Minister of METI, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. Next, a representative from Euglena Company Limited will present the keynote speech entitled Net Zero and Startups, the Sustainable Future Envisioned by Euglena. Then, we will have a discussion entitled Can Japan's Startup Ecosystem Make a Global Contribution? With a panel of people who have come to Japan and who are now active in the startup ecosystem. To end the day one program, representatives from Japan's venture capital sector will give a presentation entitled The Hidden Potential of Japan's Startup Ecosystem according to the VC sector. On day two, tomorrow, September 10th, we will begin with a pitch session entitled Global Presentation by J Startups Tackling the SDGs, presented by 10 Japanese startup businesses. Then, we will have a reverse pitch entitled Presentation of the Top 5 Innovative Japanese Companies Selected by Startup Businesses. Last, we will have a closing message from Dr. Yasuhiro Yamakawa, Associate Professor of Entrepreneurship at Bobson College, which consistently ranked as the leading institution for nurturing global entrepreneurs. First, we welcome Mr. Kouichi MUNEKIYO, the Parliamentary Vice Minister of METI, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, for the opening speech. Thank you, Mr. MUNEKIYO.
皆様こんにちは。経済産業大臣政務官のMUNEKIYO Kouichiでございます。本日はグローバルスタートアップコネクションにご参加をいただき誠にありがとうございます。本イベントはカーボンニュートラルへの日本の挑戦を世界に発信するネットゼロリーダーズサミットの一環として日本のスタートアップを中心としたネットゼロや SDGs への取り組みをご紹介することを目的としています。新型コロナウイルス感染拡大は経済や社会に多大な影響を与えており、皆様方には長い間感染拡大対策にご協力をいただいております。他方でワクチン接種が進み、ポストコロナへの期待感が高まる中、今回の危機から何を学び、次の時代にどう行動するかを考えることも合わせて重要です。その中で確実に言えることは、環境、医療、デジタル化をはじめとするさまざまな分野でのイノベーションの創出こそが、私たちの次の時代を豊かにする原動力となるということです。スタートアップはイノベーションの創出の重要な担い手です。これまでの歴史を見ても、新しい技術や サービスの多くはスタートアップから生まれています。大企業が取り組みにくい新分野や未知の市場での挑戦がやがて大きく成長し、社会実装されていく、そんなダイナミズムを我々は目の当たりにしています。現在シリコンバレーをはじめ世界各地でスタートアップ創出に向けたエコシステム形成の競争が起こっています。日本においても各国同様、2013年からスタートアップ支援を政策の柱に位置づけ、直近2021年の成長戦略実行計画においてもスタートアップのエコシステム形成に向けた包括的支援を掲げています。特に大きく成長するスタートアップ企業を創出するために2025年までに10億ドル以上の企業価値を持つユニコーン企業を50社創出するという目標を設定し、さまざまな支援策を講じているところでございます。J スタートアップはその支援策の中でも中核となるもので、グローバル市場に進出し、世界の課題解決に貢献できる潜在力のある企業を選抜し、集中支援をしています。選抜は実績のあるベンチャーキャピタルやアクセラレーターの目利きに基づいているもので、選抜された企業は今後の活躍が期待されます。今回のイベントでも SDGs に貢献する新技術、新サービスを持つ J スタートアップ企業のプレゼンテーションを予定しています。大学の最先端の研究や若者の果敢なチャレンジから生まれた J スタートアップ企業の勢いを感じていただき、ぜひ連携や投資をご検討いただきたいと思います。また本イベントではスタートアップとの連携による外部資源の利用を実践する日本の大企業の逆ピッチも予定されており、世界のスタートアップと日本企業の連携も促進してまいります。東京オリンピック・パラリンピックが開催された本年、日本への注目は高まっていると感じています。ぜひこれを日本のスタートアップ、投資家、大企業、大学などからなるスタートアップエコシステムに対する注目を高める絶好の機会にしたいと思います。世界のプレイヤーとの連携により、日本のスタートアップエコシステムはカーボンニュートラルや SDGs などの課題解決に必ずや貢献できると思います。グローバルスタートアップコネクションがそのような出会いの機会となることを記念いたしまして、私のご挨拶とさせていただきます。
Next, from Ugrena Company Limited, we welcome Chief Future Officer Ms. Rena Kawasaki and President and CEO Mr. Mitsuru Izumo to give the keynote speech entitled NETZERO and Startup, the Sustainable Future Envisioned by Ugrena. Please enjoy this video introducing Chief Future Officer Rena Kawasaki.
地球の未来を考えるために、地球の未来をよりよく変えるために、今の経営メンバーでは不十分と気づきました。未来のことを決めるときに、未来を生きる当事者たちにその議論に参加してほしい。ユーグレナ社が募集したのは18歳以下の CFO、チーフファイナンスオフィサーではなく、チーフフューチャーオフィサー、18歳以下の CFO、地球の未来を考えるならば、もっと加速しないといけない。そのために、チーフフューチャーオフィサーが必要です。依頼する業務は、会社と未来を変えるすべてです。
コロナ禍の制限の中でも縛られず、失敗を恐れず活動していきたいと考えているので、
失敗を恐れず活動していく。
ユーグレナ社当社の2代目の最高未来責任者 CFO に任命いたします。
ありがとうございます。
皆さん引き受けていただけますでしょうか。
もちろんです。よろしくお願いします。
もちろんです。じゃあ
働きたい会社はこういうものですっていうふうに言ってもらうのがゴール。
はじめまして、今回 CFO に就任させていただきました中学3年生15歳の川崎美です。今回の CFO 就任に関して私が考えていることは、今のコロナ禍の中で、前の世代がとどまってしまっているという状況にあるので、今の時代、私たちの世代がリードできる絶好のチャンスだと考えております。なので同年代の皆さんも活動を頑張っていただき、私は社会をどんどん良くしていきたいと思っていますので、活動を頑張っていただければと思います。よろしくお願いします。
未来を変えるチャンスはまさしく今。
Next, we welcome Ms. Kawasaki and Mr. Izumo for the keynote speech.
Hi, thank you for having me here. It is an honor to speak at this conference. My name is Rena Kawasaki. I'm 15 years old and I'm the Chief Future Officer at Yuglena Co. Ltd. As a CFO, I come up with new ideas together with Summit members who are all under the age of 18 for the company to put sustainability first and include a youth's perspective in important company decisions. Now, as the CFO, I often get questions about how I take initiative and take action on especially environmental issues, which impacts I cannot see. About people who wanted to do something about the upcoming iceberg that they couldn't really see on the horizon. I started caring and taking action on environmental issues when I felt a discomfort, a certain awkwardness. When I was in peace in my country without any hindrance in my life, while I heard stories of my activist friends abroad fighting in the front lines against the construction of pipelines and their homes engulfed in the effects of climate change. Why should they fight on the same planet where I have a peaceful life with no disturbance caused by the shadow that is climate change creeping slowly towards our planet? I asked another activist friend who lives in Japan why he fights for climate change, why he cares about our planet enough to take action. His answer was that, like my activist friends abroad, he saw the effects of climate change firsthand. In his case, when a fisherman from his region apologized that they didn't catch enough fish this season. He said that this got him thinking about his responsibility in the community and how the actions of his community might have caused a lack of fish. Now, as a person who lives in a city, I envied his direct experiences that resulted in his actions. It was the lack of direct experiences for me that caused discomfort enough to urge me to move. I look around at my friends in the city, and most of them know nothing about environmental crisis and the urgency to take action. In this country, the environmental crisis has been turned into a privilege, into something that only multi-million-dollar corporations earn the right to act on, something to exploit for profit. Something cut so far from the general public that we are so ignorant about an issue that can jeopardize the lives of our future children. Now that I am part of a company, I finally understand the importance of a company utilizing its platform to fulfill its duty. Product and service providers provide the necessities of a person's life. This means that companies are the last hope to create that awkwardness, that discomfort in a peaceful urban life that will urge people to see and understand that humanity is going to hit that iceberg, and we are the last generation that can hit that break. Like my company, which got rid of plastic straws on our drink products, causing positive discomfort and change for our consumers' daily lives, I believe companies and corporations owe it to the unavoidable destruction of the environment created by the services they provide, and the large platform they have to change the living pattern of their audience. So dear corporations, please use your platform, please use your voice, and make us have hope in our futures, because us individuals can't make the impact that you can make. Now, for a long time since elementary school, I was focusing my energy on fighting for and advocating for the humanitarian crises in which I could see the direct impacts and individual stories with I could empathize. Stories of girls who couldn't go to school because they had to carry clean water for her family. It wasn't after a while that another activist asked me why I divided the humanitarian crisis and the environmental crisis, and that I was being ignorant of the connections between the two that cannot be undone. Realizing that that girl couldn't go to school, her family couldn't have clean water, a human right, because of the immediate effects of climate change. From then on, I understood that issues of gender discrimination, poverty, and so much more have become intertwined with the climate crisis. Over the years, I understand that including climate change in a company's campaign is very beneficial, and I understand that numbers are easier to understand and present than changing one person's life. I have seen companies reduce their carbon footprint and present their numbers in big conventions like these. While this is a large step from where we were just a few years ago, and the world is developing fast and corporations putting the environment in their campaigns for the shared benefit of for-profit is now going to make impact and continue the legacy for the next generation. At this crucial tipping point in history, I ask all of you to not do campaigns based on the environment for media coverage, for money, for validation from other companies in the industry, but do it for your sons and daughters and everyone in between. Do it for that girl still carrying water for her family. Do not ignore the human, the person facing the immediate effects of climate change. The generation where climate change is just the numbers, where we ignore the humanitarian crisis for easy coverage is over. Please reconsider your campaigns to be about the actual human whose life is at stake. Activists have for centuries fought the corporations, the titans of society, for social and environmental justice. I ask all of you here today to help us restore the faith that was lost in the centuries of fighting and create a new generation where corporations, governments, and individuals work together to achieve sustainability and work in partnership to save our planet.
In response to Lena's message, I'd like to tell you about what we do as a Yugrena company to solve environmental issues. Today, I have 3 topics. The first one is to reduce plastic use. Secondly, to spread sustainable biofuel. And the next, third, initiatives in Bangladesh. Let me give you some background information about Yugrena company. When I was a university student, I did an internship in Bangladesh. At that time, I saw Bangladeshi people who suffered from malnutrition with my own eyes and thought I needed to solve this issue. After returning to Japan, I did a lot of research to find a solution with nutrient-rich foods and finally got to the microalgae Euglena. Today, based on our corporate philosophy of sustainability first, we carry out a wide range of activities, including the sale of food products made from Euglena, the development of biofuels containing Euglena, and social business in Bangladesh. As Lena says, it's difficult to feel familiar with environmental issues in our daily lives. As a company, Euglena believes that it's important to create a system that allows ordinary consumers to gain new sense of value in their daily lives through the products they use every day. As Lena mentioned in her message, at the CFO's suggestion last year, Euglena eliminated the plastic bottle and made it possible for customers to select products with or without straws. With these actions, when customers buy Euglena products, they will notice that the plastic bottle products they used to buy are no longer available, and products without straws are now sold. And some will think about the reasons for this. Euglena is working on the production and sale of biofuels as well. Biofuels are fuels produced from biomass and can be used as an alternative to fossil-based liquid fuels. Biomass feedstock absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis during the growth process, so that amount of carbon dioxide emission during fuel combustion is offset. It contributes to the realization of carbon neutrality. In June of this year, we successfully made our first flight using biofuel produced by our company. Now, we'll show you the video of the first flight. Euglena 社のバイオジェット燃料サステオでございます。これはサステナブルオイルから付けた名前ですけれども、日本の空をその石油で
飛ぶのではなくて、バイオジェット燃料でそのグリーンに飛ぶということをこれから当たり前にしてまいります。
I think when people heard about the first flight on TV and in the newspapers, they realized that Euglena biofuel really does make airplanes fly, and Euglena is trying to achieve carbon neutrality. Before this flight, we had been selling biodiesel fuel to B2B companies. In addition to that, in this April, we sold Euglena biofuel at a gas station to increase opportunities for general consumers to become familiar with Euglena's biofuel. We believe that by providing people with options of using biofuel instead of gasoline they usually use, we gave them an opportunity to think about environmental issues. In this way, we think that by gradually changing a matter of course we have now, we can make general people feel closer to environmental issues. As I explained earlier, the experience in Bangladesh made me start up Euglena company. We've been producing and delivering nutrient-rich Euglena to children in Bangladesh for school lunch since 2014. We use a portion of our sales in Japan as sponsorship money. We have delivered totally 10 million cookies to children in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, we are also taking on social business through agricultural support. Although Bangladesh is an agricultural country where most of the people are farmers, many of them are in poverty. In order to solve this problem, we are training Bangladesh farmers in agricultural techniques. As a result, the farmers have mastered agricultural technology to grow higher quality and more crops than ever before. We are building a business model that will enable them to generate profits by exporting the harvested crops not only to Bangladesh but to Japan. In 2019, we became the first Japanese company to be selected as a business partner of the WFP World Food Program, and together we provided support for Rohingya refugees who fled Myanmar to Bangladesh. In the areas where we have provided agricultural support in the past, it was not possible to grow crops because of serious salt damage caused by coastal erosion and saltwater intrusion through rivers and ground underwater caused by rising sea levels due to climate change. Even though Bangladesh farmers have only little responsibility for climate change, they are suffering terribly and are not able to grow crops. I believe this is one of the causes, and this is one of the cases where environmental issues and poverty issues cannot be separated, as Lena mentioned. In this case, by supporting the introduction of appropriate agriculture technology in the salt-affected area, we are able to help the farmers to start growing crops again and create their jobs. There are many social issues associated with climate change, and Lena's message reminded me not to think of environmental issues in isolation. I explained 3 main initiatives Euglena company has taken on to solve environmental issues, which is to reduce plastic use, to spread sustainable biofuel, and initiatives in Bangladesh. After listening Lena's message today, I felt again that it was a good idea to set up the position of CFO, Chief Future Officer, to bring the future generations into the management discussions and let them make proposals to change the company and its future. Lastly, Lena, do you have a message for the people who are watching the program, both domestic and international companies?
We have all been at that point watching the news about the serious effects of climate change happening somewhere in the world and thinking whether you are too young or too old to make any change to the state of our planet. We all have a role to play in saving our home as the last citizens of this planet who can put a stop to this issue. As for the generation that is currently in their prime in the workforce, I hope you can see that these issues of climate change may not be easy to see the effects of in the time of your generation. But these issues will definitely become a large part of our lives when I and many others become a grown-up. I was extremely moved by the words of Mr. Ismo at a recent conference where he told the other heads of the company that whatever I and the future summit members say goes and prioritized us, a generation that has been ignored and silenced. It was here that I could have confidence in saying that Uglena is serious about the CFO initiative and putting sustainability first and the future generations first. I want not only Uglena, but also other companies without fear or failure, but just with the pride of youth that they are making the world better for.
I believe that the role of a startup is to confront a difficult problem that no one has ever solved before and to create a case of small early success. Achieving carbon neutrality is a task that humankind have never completed. We will continue to take on this challenge without fear of failure. One of the Uglena's action guidelines is take the first step. Uglena has a corporate culture that values taking on challenges and being not afraid of change. Therefore, we believe we can accomplish the challenge of realizing carbon neutrality. If Uglena can do it, other companies will be able to do it for sure. I hope that we can work together to achieve the great goal of carbon neutrality.
Next, we will have a panel discussion with 3 participants: Mr. Justin Warden, co-founder and president of Playco Global Incorporated and co-founder of Zynga, Mr. Jonathan Siegel, CEO at Xenon Partners, and Mr. Tim Romero, head of Google for Startups Japan. The theme is, can Japan's startup ecosystem make a global contribution? Mr. Romero will also act as moderator.
Okay, thank you. I'm Tim Romero. I'm the head of Google for Startups Japan, and I'm the host of the Disrupting Japan podcast. I'll be moderating today's discussion, and I'd like to thank Justin Waldron and Jonathan Siegel for joining us today. And before asking each of our guests for a brief introduction, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been in Japan for close to 30 years now, and I've started 4 startups here with 2 exits and 2 bankruptcies. So, 50-50, which is not bad as far as startups go. But as head of Google for Startups Japan, let me tell you a little bit about what Google for Startups does. So at our core, we connect startups with the right people, products, and best practices to help them grow. But why? What does that really mean in practice? So it's been quite a few years since Google was an actual startup, but that startup DNA is still a big part of who Google is. We understand that when startups do well, everyone does well. We love seeing people using technology and new ways to solve problems. We love seeing startups using technology in ways that we've never thought of before. We value that, and we appreciate that, and we want to support that. So how do we help startups? Well, very briefly, Google for Startups runs a wide range of startup programs that fall into 3 categories. First, our 8-week intensive program like our Accelerator and our Growth Academy. Second, multi-day workshops on going global, diversity, fundraising, and other topics. And third, our ongoing interactive community where founders can get direct daily advice from Googlers. Now, all these programs are free and open to any founders who are ready for them. And it's working. Startups in our community have seen massive growth in sales, fundraising, and jobs creative. we are incredibly optimistic about the future of startups in Japan. So the Google for Startups Japan campus is our newest, and once the COVID restrictions are lifted and we reopen, I'd personally like to welcome you to visit us there. But for now, just like today's discussion, we are fully and completely online. So thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to turn it over to Justin Waldron to give a brief introduction of himself and his company. Justin?
Thanks, Tim. My name is Justin. I'm a co-founder and president of Playco. We build games that help the world come closer together with the people they care about. And that means for us building games on the platforms, we spend time with the people we care about. So this is platforms you may have heard of. In Japan, it might mean something like Line or Zoom, where we are right now. In the rest of the world, it might mean things like TikTok, Facebook, and many, many others. And so what we do is, instead of focusing on building games on the platforms, the App Store platforms that people typically see the games on, we're actually very focused on working with the social platforms to go and create a new type of game. I'm happy to chat more about that and our experience in Japan.
Excellent, we definitely will. Jonathan, can you do a quick intro of yourself and what you're doing?
I can. So I'm a techie who was in the right place at the right time when I lived in California and was able to take some of my tech projects into startup companies. And my wife is Irish, so I moved to Ireland right about the time that Ireland was going through their own development of a startup community. And I seem to have now ended up in Japan as Japan gets more and more into their startup community. And currently I make angel investments. I work with companies that are VC-backed and looking for what their next options are. And I've had a chance to finally co-found something here in Japan I might talk about later.
Excellent. So, Jonathan, I want to dig into the right place, right time comment, because I think that that's a big component of all entrepreneurship. But why Japan? What brought you to Japan? I mean, we all come here for different reasons. So, did you spot an opportunity when you were already in Japan and decide it was worth staying and pursuing? Or was there something unique about the market that you spotted from overseas and that attracted you here? So why Japan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I'm not unlike many foreigners who end up staying in Japan for the long haul, but it's more the other way around. I was looking for things that would anchor me into Japan because I do have so much respect for the culture and the place. And I'm delighted that right now, it does feel like there's a change happening here where the skills and the background I have are becoming more and more relevant. I did try and come out 10, 15 years ago, and it just wasn't the same timing. As you say, the right place at the right time. So I'm really hoping right now is that catalyzing period for Japan to really find those bigger technology companies domestically and see them thrive also globally.
All right. Hey, Justin, I want to ask you the same question, because when we met a couple of years ago, you were very interested in Japan specifically. So what brought you to Japan? Why Japan?
Well, I mean, my background is in consumer internet. And when I think about great consumer products, I mean, Japan, growing up and seeing the products that Japan was exporting, growing up playing, Nintendo games and seeing the Sony PlayStation and all these things, I think it's something it's obviously a skill that Japan has had, and I've always been fascinated with. And I finally had the chance to actually come and participate in a project in Japan for the first time about 10 years ago, when my previous company, Zynga, we were looking to expand into Japan, and Japan was one of the largest markets in the world for the type of game we were building. And so we wanted to partner with a local company we were looking for a company to purchase to enter the market. And so at that point in time, I met some really great people. And some of them, we ended up buying a company called Uno, which was run by Yamada Shintaro-san, who's now actually the CEO of Mercari. So it's been a really cool perspective that I've been able to get to see the sort of ecosystem go through the changes it's had over the last decade. And I think as Tim, you know, and Ishii-san knows, like to see the last decade here in Japan, it's very invigorating because it's improved tremendously. And so I got very excited about that, seeing that and realized there was a moment in time here where I could help be a bridge to a lot of entrepreneurs in Japan and abroad for people who are looking to come to Japan. And I wanted to figure out how I could use my experience in both places to actually help make that connection and to help these companies either go global from Japan or enter Japan from abroad. And it's, you know, beyond my sort of day-to-day duties at Playco, that's something I've been focused on as well, which is angel investing and advising companies to help them do that.
So it's interesting you mentioned that because there's a lot of big gaming markets and Japan's been through, I mean, going from the console era to the web era to the mobile era, it's gone through several major iterations in gaming. And is your sense that Japan is kind of at a crossroads? Is there another big shift coming?
Yeah, I mean, we like to believe there is, and we're working with people. You know, one of my co-founders is Otsuka Takeshi-san, who was one of the original folks back at DNA and worked on mobile game back in the day with the sort of flip phones that were then popular in Japan. And in many ways, what we saw was like two completely different ecosystems. Where with my company, Zynga, my previous company, doing very well on desktop, Facebook, and these social networks. And then something was going on in Japan. And when I arrived on the ground 10 years ago, I was shocked because these companies that no one had heard of outside of Japan were having absolutely huge businesses inside of Japan. And all of the rules were different and all the technology was different. And so immediately for me, you know, I wanted to dive in and just understand what's going on here. I could learn a lot from this. This is like an alternate way of succeeding. And so, you know, along the way, I've been lucky to maintain those relationships with people like Take, and now to start a company together a decade later, and to take our learnings from what we've seen in the past and use what some people call the innovation time machine, right? Of sort of combining ideas from different places to construct our idea of what the future might be. And I like the idea that, you know, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And so we already see a lot of our players playing in this way. And basically it's a way where they don't need to download the apps. They're finding these games and they're playing them directly in the places where they already spend their time. And it's not just like one specific phenomenon in any particular region. It's something that has to do with just the ease of use and how easy it is to discover new content and what most people want, which is just to share a new experience with somebody they care about. And so we're just trying to make that happen.
Thank you. I think it's interesting that we've all kind of come at this in different ways. Speaking for myself, all the startups I've started here have been kind of opportunistic. I first came to Japan to kind of check things out. I was never planning on staying more than a couple of years, and new opportunities, new projects came up, and it was always something more interesting. And it 30 years later, it's still getting more and more interesting. But actually, Justin, kind of digging in what you're saying. So you've done a lot with partnerships in Japan. So have you ever, from your own perspective, either as when you were forming those partnerships or when you were fundraising, have you ever felt there were particular advantages as being a foreign founder or particular disadvantages of being a foreign founder here? What was your direct experience on that?
I mean, I think like Jonathan, the way that I probably landed in Japan, you know, I was lucky with a lot of the previous experience I had in the US, in California. So I was able to arrive sort of well taken care of and with the right people helping me to succeed here. And I guess what I would say is the fact that there are so few people in each of these industries to help connect and form that bridge is mostly an opportunity. And so what I found is that it's these challenges that you might face are really, to me at least, and this is being like an optimist and a founder. I mean, they are what creates the opportunity and the reason to be here. And I got excited about recruiting the talent inside Japan because what we found is that Japan has a tremendous amount of talent, and that there are more and more people who want to join startups. And by being a startup where we can allow them to have the experience of working in a company that's got a bit more of an international footprint, but still the comfort of working with a lot of people directly in Tokyo, that's quite a unique experience. And so I think for us, it's just access to the talent is a very, very big and powerful draw for us. And especially within games, I think, it's undeniable Japan has probably some of the best entertainment talent in the world.
Okay. Jonathan, what about you? Because you've run a number of companies here. Have you found it's been advantageous or disadvantageous or some combination of the two, being a foreign founder here in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, because I lack the cultural background and understanding of the norms, and all of my teammates do, I'd say, when we show up here, that's a disadvantage because we don't have a reputation yet. And trying to build a reputation in a country that requires a lot of respect is a difficult and challenging process when you arrive with a startup. On the other hand, being able to ignore those same norms and the cultural barriers that others see, when you're foreign and you show up here, you don't even see those barriers. So sometimes we get to the advantage of not knowing what we shouldn't do or what we can't do, and we get to bring that with us into the market here. So I think there definitely is a balance, and I don't think it's just in Japan. I mean, I routinely look at the composition of the Y Combinator and the unicorns in the US and where their founders come from, because I've lived in other places and I kind of hear this question sometimes. And half of the unicorn, these billion-dollar companies in the US, are from foreign founders. And I mean, Musk is from South Africa, Uber, Travis is actually Canadian. I'm going to throw that one as foreign, and we could go down the list. So I think it's not completely unusual to have that foreign perspective be a bit of a strength. And of course, the challenges that it brings with it.
Well, I mean, you raise a really interesting point. I think there is something there that in every startup ecosystem that I know of, the foreign entrepreneurs play a much larger role than the percentage representation in the community, in the US, in London, in Germany, in Tokyo as well. And I mean, maybe it's a combination of two things. I mean, first, anybody willing to move and travel halfway around the world is going to kind of be a natural risk taker. They're more likely to try something new just by the fact that they've done that already. And also maybe as outsiders, the traditional career paths are often closed and they feel more pushed into entrepreneurship. But for whatever the reason, I think you're right. I mean, I've seen this everywhere, that the foreign community does play a big role in every country I've seen. I do want to drill down on one other thing you mentioned, though, in terms of I agree, nothing is inherently an advantage or a disadvantage. It's in what you use. So one of the experiences that I've had, and actually a lot of women entrepreneurs have told me this as well, but have you found that, for example, as a foreign entrepreneur, you would be able to make a sales call at a couple levels above what a Japanese entrepreneur would be expected? Is that kind of what you mean by not strictly following the social norms?
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely one of them, but even more, maybe even taking a model. One of the challenges when you entrepreneur is that you have to create this new way of doing something that doesn't exist now. I mean, Justin, the next generation of gaming, you have to actually see what it's going to be. And because other people don't have that in their world yet, you have to put a lot of energy out to change the way people think. And I think that in Japan, that tends to be a real superpower that someone foreign gets, because we miss the little cues telling us not to. And then that's what I think, that like at a big picture, it really just lets us do things that don't exist yet with a lot more confidence than we really should.
That's really interesting. Well, let's talk about, let's continue that thought. Talk a bit about foreign capital and foreign startups in general. So, I mean, all of us have been involved with Japan for at least 10 years. And over that 10 years, I mean, there's been so much progress in how easy it's become to start a startup or do a market entry, simplified visas, special tax incentives, one-stop company formation. But, you know, those kind of things, what other kind of things can be done or maybe should be done to attract more foreign founders and more foreign investors into Japan, and to make Japan more attractive to existing foreign startups who might want to make a market entry? Jonathan, what do you think?
I'll take a crack at that if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So one thing that I realized, having been very involved at the earliest stages of companies in different places, is that when you're doing a startup, people sleep under their desk. They spend 20-hour days working. And maybe that's one way that they have an unfair advantage over their competitors. They're just putting in the time. And what that typically means is you start getting rid of all the things that are not core to your business. And I know in America, one of someone made their own shake, the Soylent drink, because they didn't like stopping for meals. So they really got focused on just what's core. And I feel like Japan has a bit of way to go there. And the thing that would change the everyday work of being in the startup in a positive way would be things that reduce those barriers. For example, and again, I'm going to use kind of like things that would be really normal in the US. Typically, a startup would just not pay taxes, okay? They're not trying to avoid paying them. They're just so busy, they didn't know that they were supposed to get a business license from, let's say, San Francisco. And that tends to be more the norm for a startup. And so later on, they have to figure everything out, and there's a lot of lenience, a lot of forgiveness. But in Japan, I don't believe that's the case today. And I'm not saying startups should not pay their taxes. I'm saying that...
Well, most of them are losing money anyway.
But that all those little pieces along the way are just barriers to not being able to focus on what's core and what's central.
I see what you mean. So for example, instead of the more American style is kind of like move forward and then fix things when you get a chance. And a lot of times the Japanese approach is wait, stop, let's fix this, and then later you can move forward.
Exactly.
All right. Yeah, philosophically, I think there's a lot to that.
And it could be in the form of like, just, you know, like this is what you have. These are this is the fee or the structure. Like maybe that's what Google is providing, is that this is the environment where if you get embedded into that environment, you handle, you know, finding payroll and how that works and all these other local requirements and things that you're supposed to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Justin, what do you think? What could be done to make Japan more attractive and to attract more foreign startups, more foreign investment?
Well, we have to think of how to even talk about it, because it occurs to me in this conversation, it's not something I've given a lot of thought to, but Jonathan made an amazing point about American entrepreneurs and how many of them are immigrants. And I'll point out one key difference that I didn't notice until this conversation is we don't actually call them foreigners in America, we call them immigrants. And there's a permanence implied with that I think is really powerful. Like I think Jonathan and we're looking to build companies that outlive us. Hopefully, that's the dream. And you know, as much as Jonathan's bounced around and I've lived in different places, I'd like some place that I could call home if I wanted to. And so, I think there's like, it's implicit in every conversation, right? When are you leaving? Is sort of, even if asked in the best possible way, is a conversation that we have to get around, right? I mean, if you want to start a company someplace, especially something, it's going to be a 5 to 10 year endeavor, at least, to do something interesting. You're not a foreigner after 10 years of being here. And so this is a decision that's large enough that like people need to be comfortable saying, yeah, I'm going to call Japan home. And I think part of I don't want to speak for Jonathan, but part of what was able to get me over that is we have some amount of flexibility with like kind of taking a chance and seeing how it goes. And next thing you know, I'm here for 5 years and I've loved it. And we're starting to really like plan for a longer term. But I think people need to see a longer term path more quickly because frankly, if you're on like a 1-year visa, that's not enough of a sort of, you can't think about building a 5 to 10 year company on a 1-year visa. And so we need to have the ability to see these people as immigrants and not as foreigners. That's just something that came up in this conversation.
That's a really good point because I mean, I think that those the special visas and the rapid incorporation definitely is a step in the right direction. It's helpful, but there is that underlying concern of how committed is this new market entry startup to Japan, or how committed is this particular foreign founder to Japan? And even though I've lived here, like say almost 30 years, I still get that question when starting a new business. That is a feeling that does run very deep in Japan.
Yeah, and the reason I mention it is because I think this is where Japan has its ultimate strength, actually, which is there have been a lot of countries that have found ways to attract fleeting foreign investment. And I think from a policy perspective, it's much easier to create that type of policy. And so we've seen countries and they create temporary sort of tax havens or things like this that they got a lot of short-term interest. And I think that they've had challenges getting people to move and to stay. And so I think Japan is sort of infamous for being a place that when foreigners move to, they don't want to leave for the most part. And so it does not have the retention problem that a lot of other countries have, actually. And so if you can solve the sort of the top end of the funnel, as we would call it, and sort of, we're talking about this like a business, I think the opportunity is huge because actually there are a lot of people who want to work in Japan. And then there are a lot of people who don't want to leave Japan once they actually have the opportunity to work there. And so you can go and solve the part that has sort of the most prior art, which is just finding all the ways to get people in more easily. And that's like most other countries do not have that setup. They don't have the people who want to live and work there, and they don't have the people who don't want to leave once they get there. And so when this problem is solved, I expect Japan to be in a very good position because I think those things are actually the harder parts to solve for other places.
That's a really interesting point. And you're right. It's easy enough to attract capital with tax incentives, but moving money around is a whole lot simpler than moving people and ideas around. So I think you're right. Japan, it is very attractive from the quality of life and just the societal point of view. But let's turn this question around a bit, because the flip side of this is what can be done to get more Japanese startups accessing global markets. Because if you look at, Japan's huge success in the 60s and 70s, it was all export driven. Over the last few years, Japan's GDP growth is mainly driven by exports. It's not increased domestic demand. And yet, Japanese startups still, with a couple of exceptions, are still very focused on the domestic market. So what do you think could be done to get Japanese founders, Japanese startups more interested in going global? And Justin, as long as I've got you here, what are your thoughts on it?
Maybe it's just the crew I spend my time with, but everybody is very interested in going global. Here's a challenge, I would say, I think it's highly rational to go build a great company in Japan because Japan is a huge market and the rest of the world is much more competitive than Japan. And so if you think about like how some of these companies got started, these companies like Sony, they weren't selling the Walkmans abroad before they were selling other things earlier to Japanese customers. And I think that what's really powerful for American companies is that the market at home is so large that it's not like most American startups actually think from the moment they start, I have to go solve for the global audience. They usually don't. They just have such a local, large home market that they understand very well that they can develop something there, succeed, and then have the resources to go and bring it to other places. And actually, Japan is one of the few other countries that's so big on its own for most markets that people can do the same. And that's a really great position to be in. And again, that's something that you can't change with policy. This is something that Japan already has that most countries don't. The double-edged sword there is that it also makes it less of an imperative. So it's easy to build a strong business in Japan without ever going global. And so I think it could be even rational for some entrepreneurs to say like, hey, I'm going to build a company and IPO it in Japan with Japanese customers. Now, I would say that one way you could help them.
Push back on that a bit. Actually, just let me push back on that a bit, because I think I've seen, at least the people I've talked to, my experience has been different than that. So in the US, usually startups, by the time they're hitting Series C or D, I mean, people are talking about global expansion. They're talking, I mean, it's maybe not from day one, but it's sort of like a natural part of the growth plan. But in Japan, a lot of founders, a lot of VCs will push back on founders who want to go global, and they'll say, no, IPO first, and then we'll figure out the global expansion plans later.
But also the evaluate.
No, go ahead, please. This is
that's exactly where I was going. So Tim, you're right. That was the next part of my answer, which is, so how do you fix that? It's on the investor side. So. But this is not something that's just investors, it's also public markets. And it's true that, so in American markets, to go and IPO a company, I mean, you need to go find a way to make $1 billion in revenue now. And that requires probably getting beyond the US. And in Japan, that's not true. And so when you think about it from a perspective of an American founder, the hurdle that you have to get over to go actually get liquidity and to be independent and own your own destiny is so high that it sort of necessitates to go and not only start in your home market, but then expand. And in Japan, the liquidity bar is much lower, actually. You can build a big enough company to IPO in Japan just by succeeding within Japan. And maybe your investors are right, depending on how they're thinking about it. Maybe there are a lot of times where it makes sense to just go for that outcome, because expansion overseas is very difficult and very expensive. And if you can't win in your home market, you definitely can't win abroad. However, people that have patience and can look at this capital, the deployment of their capital that's more like the global VCs, where they see a Japanese startup that has the potential to go and operate without the pressure of making a profit that an IPO requires in the near term, can then get a little bit of an opportunity to work with these Japanese companies that have the ability to go bring their product abroad. But the local market may or may not think that's the right answer, because IPOing soon is attractive to all the investors that are thinking about it in that way. And so
then let me ask the logical follow-on to this. And I think, Jonathan, you're going to want to start a late stage fund,
and start a late stage fund and convince these entrepreneurs that they shouldn't IPO. Tell them they have 3 more years, and you'll back them for the next 3 years, and that's one way of fixing this problem.
So do you think, and like I say, Jonathan, I think you're going to want to jump in on this as well. So I think that, I think what you've hit on there is really important. Historically, the Japanese VC market, though the whole way it's worked has been a steady stream of fairly low risk IPOs, where in the US, it's much more of a swing for the fences, try to get the 100x, 1000x return on a handful of investments. So we've been seeing over the last 7-8 years in particular, a lot of foreign capital flowing into Japan, a lot of foreign funds coming into Japan. Is that going to change it? Is this changing now? Jonathan, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, the capital won't fix anything overnight, but I definitely believe that there is foreign interest in investing in Japan. My sector isn't on the consumer side. Mine is more on the business to business and this whole ecosystem of software as a service. And Japan has a fraction of the investment in those software as a service companies. Even if you reduce the size of the market in Japan, it's underinvested in the software as a service. And I think you see it when you live here in Japan, when you operate businesses, you don't have thousands of vendors that are providing online versions of software. You have much more of even almost a box software, right? A more traditional market for software. So I think that the foreign investors are definitely aware of that, and that there's interest in being early into that change. And the reason why the capital alone won't make things happen overnight is because Japan really has a lot of uniqueness, and the businesses reflect that uniqueness. The way things operate reflects that uniqueness. So even something as simple as a ringisho, I think I'm saying that right, is something deeply embedded in Japanese business practice that's absent from foreign. We don't have a concept of that in foreign software. So if you're going to create business-to-business software and business-business relationships, you might actually make a better domestic product that serves the domestic market and that blocks out foreign competitors as that's available. But it just means that a lot of the ecosystem has to get developed ground up here in Japan. That's what I believe is happening right now. You see these core functions for how businesses transact coming to life. Everything from free to Spur calendaring to a smart round for handling the stock certificates. And those foreign players can't operate because they don't reflect the needs of the local market.
I think it makes sense as like a smart defensive move. And I, especially if you look at the SaaS market here in Japan now, a lot of it is very focused on domestic needs and unique kind of domestic needs of Japanese enterprise. But do you think there's something in there? How do we get from there to something that is really export worthy, a company that can move into other markets? So
at first, I believe you do have to develop that domestic opportunity and really saturate it in order to build up something valuable enough to compete on that global level. And I think it'll happen incidentally. In the same way, like I don't think there was a concerted effort to get manga to be enjoyed by every high schooler in the US, or to get the Nintendo as the most coveted gaming system back when I was a kid. Or even the Honda motorcycle really was created because I think the dealers were driving this little Honda motorcycle to their dealership in the US. And they didn't sell them, but people saw it and they said, I want that little super efficient motorcycle that was kind of unique from the Japan perspective, but really took off internationally, obviously. So I think it'll be more like that. There'll be these specific, thoughtful changes that Japan brings to these applications. And when they overserve that community, they'll naturally have the chance to springboard. But I don't think just going head to head and if you see pick your unicorn in the West and try and duplicate it here and go back out internationally, I don't think that that's the way it's going to happen.
I'm gonna put a pin on that. I want to come back to that thought. But before I do, I want to throw it back over to Justin, because you were just talking about the importance of foreign capital. Do you think it's having an impact already in Japan, or do you think it's more of just like it could potentially have an impact and allow these founders to stay private longer and to be more aggressive? Is it something in the future or something in the present we're seeing?
There are a few funds in Japan that have opened up to address this late stage opportunity. And I don't want to speak for them, but I think this is an opportunity that there are a few other people who also see. And so I think it's not just foreign capital, it'll also be domestic capital, recognizing there's an opportunity for a longer term backer that doesn't play by the same rules, and that'll just naturally adjust the markets. It's the same thing that happened in the US when we saw a lot of the growth stage sort of IPO funds came in earlier pre-IPO. Like if you look at Fidelity and Tiger and all these hedge funds that are now doing VC late stage pre-IPO. They weren't there 5 years ago. And so I think it's just a natural sort of competition that'll continue. I will say that I really agree with Jonathan on this point. I mean, I think if you go and look at like how TikTok has become a global success, it was actually exported, but domestic first. And this is the same exact pattern that we're seeing in every single other startup that the US has exported, and the same every success story we see in Japan, actually. And so I do believe that one of the challenges is always that because there are so many people, or sorry, so many opportunities locally that do need to be addressed, that you're seeing hints of through foreign companies, it does make sense to go solve those problems before those companies come and solve them in Japan. It may be very far down their list, and the businesses in some cases will be very large and very successful just within Japan. However, I will say Mercari is one of the really interesting instances where this didn't really happen, actually. That type of business, I invested in sort of like a mobile secondhand marketplace in San Francisco in 2010. In 2011, there were dozens of these. And they had very similar sort of interfaces and a very similar idea of how to approach this market. And there were a lot of failures in the US figuring out how to crack that. And there were a lot of things unique to Japan and what Yamada-san and the team did at Mercari that solved many of the problems that people were not able to solve in the US. And I think now with their expansion to the US, like they're able to bring a lot of that unique perspective because they solved the market at home. Whereas a lot of people wasted a lot of capital in the US trying to solve this problem and couldn't. And I think now Mercari has the patience and the insights to potentially be able to do it. And so that would follow the pattern that we've seen other companies succeed at. And same thing we're seeing with TikTok, where, I mean, it was a huge success.
So what did Mercari do differently? What was their key? What was the key learning that Mercari brought to the US market, where they succeeded where so many of the US companies failed?
Well, one key thing that I'll say is just like the level of convenience that Mercari created was not a level of convenience that anyone was able to create within the US. And I think it required a lot of partnerships that required a certain amount of proof and capital that they are now able to execute on abroad that no company was able to execute on previously. And so the simple example would just be by partnering with convenience stores in Japan to allow the sort of package drop off and anonymous mailing and everything. This is a service that basically made it so easy to sell these items that it was, why not just list everything? Because you're going to pass by a convenience store on your way to work and you can drop it off and sell it to somebody. And so they really unlocked the friction piece. And I think getting those same types of conveniences set up in the US were not as simple. As you know, Japanese convenience stores can do everything and they're set up to partner with everybody and do everything already. And so when they came into those markets with proof, they could do the longer term conversation of, look, here's how it works in Japan. Here's why that's important, and actually go and build those types of partnerships. And so that's just a part of it, but I think there's a lot more to it than that.
Okay. Now, I want to get back to, Jonathan, what you were talking about when you mentioned like Honda's motorcycle market entry, which is one of the great, amazing market entry stories of all time, how they kind of invented the whole sport of off-road motorcycle riding. So what are those unique points today? So what is it that Japan has to offer the world? Is there a particular technology or a process or approach, or maybe an industry that you think could achieve much greater success outside Japan than it currently is? Is there something that gives Japan a unique competitive advantage overseas? What do you think? Let's dig into this, because
great question.
A lot of stuff in there.
I'm probably going to pass back to Justin for a very thoughtful answer, but I will fill a little space with my thought. What I've noticed in Japan is the one area which I think Japan has an obvious advantage is gaming. It's just in the DNA, the thoughtfulness, the creativity, the deep embedding in how people think about gaming, I think is really strong in Japan. I would bet on that 10 out of 10 times. A less obvious area is robotics. And I remember reading an article that had robots coming into America. They were going to automate something. This is a decade or two ago. And the backlash in America was really negative. We didn't want robots. Robots were coming to replace us. They're going to attack us. They're like the enemy in our movies. And in Japan, it's kind of the opposite. Robots are actually helpful, friendly. They're here to help out. And I think just because of the dynamics of the population and how Japan will need more automation in their life, in the everyday life, that is just going to be an amazing wind in the sails of innovation for Japan. I think it'll be an easy market, quick to adopt robotics. And then as Japan solves those problems ahead of the rest of the world, they'll be ahead and able to export it back.
Justin, do you want to pick up the thread on the games or?
I'll speak a little bit. Yeah, I speak a little bit more broadly than games on this. I think the biggest exports come from a window in time where you have an insight that no one else has yet. And so what we're seeing is like Sony built a portable player for cassette tapes before anybody else had the insight to go and do it. And they did the same with the game console, and they did the same with music, with CDs. And so I think that what's exportable is rarely the thing that you like, to Jonathan's earlier point, you see something working abroad, you give the local solution to it, because you can't re-export that thing. That other company is succeeding enough where it was obvious for you. And so you may be able to address the local market, but you're rarely going to be able to take that and then go sell it back out to the countries where you found it in the first place. And when it comes to startups, and I'm not speaking for big companies, because I think big companies, it might make sense to go and take that approach. But when it comes to startups, you have to find a way to escape competition. And when it comes to escaping competition, you need to stumble into something that's unique that other people aren't doing. And so you need to know where to explore, right? And so I think like what's really valuable about what Jonathan is saying is robotics is something where there's a lot more talent, and there are more industries like this in Japan. And what needs to happen is that talent needs to be placed in a position where it can go explore places where you find something you didn't expect. Because the truth is, if any of us knew that TikTok was the next social network that was going to work, we would have just went and built it, right? The reason that TikTok was able to export it is because no one realized that before they did. And frankly, like, they were able to export it faster than other people were able to copy it. And that was not a technical export. That's not the way software works. Like, we can go and build a TikTok lookalike. If you give me and Jonathan a month and some pizza, we could probably go build one for you. But it doesn't make a difference, right? It's not about the technology. It's about the insight and getting it to market early and building up the network effects that they've been able to create. And so I guess that's the process, right? It's how do you go and discover something that people haven't figured out yet? Because it's always a thing that we haven't discovered that ends up being the most valuable export.
Well, then what about as for a hypothetical? When you talk about the importance of a window in time, and I think this has an intersection with robotics as well, what about something like elder care, where the demographic trends in Japan are a good 10 years ahead of what's happening in Europe, maybe 15 years ahead of what's happening in China, where this might be a unique area where Japan would have a decade head start on the rest of the world.
I'd love to invest in that if that's something you're going to start, Tim. It's prescient.
We'll see if the Evocative Machines project comes to anything. But yeah. No, but as a space, is that something you think might be uniquely, the Japanese market might be uniquely positioned to export?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, these things are so hard. They're always obvious looking backwards, but really hard to say, well, 10 years from now, this is what the market's going to look like. But listen, to wrap things up, let's try to do exactly that. Let's kind of pull out our crystal balls here. And 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how do you think things are going to work out in Japan? What are things going to look like here, both within the startup ecosystem and for society as a whole? John,
I'll go.
take a at that?
So I would love it if in a decade's time, there ends up being a large number of local entrepreneurs or immigrant entrepreneurs who've really embedded themselves back into the community. Because one thing about startups is that it's not something, although it is a wealth creation vehicle for some people, not for most, but even the people that find success, all they want to do is have more resources to go do it again. And so if I could predict a great future, it would be that startup founders end up getting the same status as maybe a great sake breweries, where they're really nourished and they're encouraged. It's an occupation that's respectable. People can go and work with them, and that there might be a whole bouquet of options of people that have done it before and are supporting the next generation of startup founders.
Just like there's a respect for the craft of starting companies. I like it. Justin, how do you think things are going to work out over the next decade or two?
Well, I'll go with Jonathan's style of answer. How would I like to imagine they might? Because I think 10 to 20 years is a long time. And I think if you asked anyone 3 years ago if China would have the world's largest social network, Americans would have laughed you out of the room. So the world is changing faster than we expected on every front. And one thing I'll say is, like, we already get to see this, because what may have been our future 10 years out and working remotely and globally just happened. And we got that part of our life to just fast forward so quickly. And now we're in a position to say, well, what does that mean? Because now there are some parts of our life where they've been pulled 10 years forward, but the rest hasn't. And so what I've been thinking a lot about is, like, what does that mean for Japan? Because I'll tell you, like, a year and a half ago, when we were hiring people from different parts of the world and starting out that process, we had to kind of convince people that this was interesting and use it as a strength to hire new people. Now, everybody expects that this is the way to work. And what does it mean when these local engineers in Japan who have the English abilities can go and work for any company in the world? And what does it mean when any Japanese startup company can hire an engineer anywhere in the world? That's the world that we were talking about a year ago as if it was very far away, and now it's here, and it's not going away. And so what I would say is, I think we're going to see more competition to get for countries to encourage people to make their country the place that they call home. And we're seeing people spread out, and they're thinking hard about if they are able to move. And in technology, we're lucky to be able to do that. Where do I want to live? Because I'm not tethered to any particular place anymore. I think that's going to become increasingly normal, to the point where it's a very large opportunity over the next couple of years. And so a decade out, I mean, these things that would have seemed impossible just before the pandemic, I think are now possible. And it's perfect timing to be having this conversation. So thanks for inviting me today.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, the world is definitely getting smaller, and there are more and more startups in Japan that, particularly on the technical and design staff, are using a lot of foreign talent. As you mentioned, there's a lot of desire to live in Japan. So things are certainly set up for that to happen moving forward. Hey, and guys, I mean, I hate to say this, but we're getting close to time, so we're going to need to wrap this up. I'd like to thank both of you for being part of this, and thank Mandy and Nishi-san for hosting us. It was a really good discussion. I feel like we're just getting started here. So after COVID's behind us, maybe let's pick up this conversation over a beer or a coffee sometime. So thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much for having us, Tim. Thank you, Ishi-san.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks, guys. Really looking forward to chatting again.
Talk to you soon.
Next, Mr. Masahiko Homa, General Partner at Incubate Fund, and Ms. Cassie Matsui, General Partner at Empower Partners Fund. limited partners. We'll present the hidden potential of Japan's startup ecosystem according to the VC sector. First, we welcome Mr. Honma to give his speech. Thank you, Mr. Honma.
Hi, everybody. My name is Masa Honma, co-founder and general partner of Incubate Fund. Today, I would like to talk about the potential of Japan's tech sector and the startup ecosystem. Firstly, please let me explain about Incubate Fund. Incubate Fund is a venture capital firm founded in 2010. We have been investing in a variety of tech startups with a focus on seed and early stage. We are one of the largest early stage tech VC in Japan in terms of the size and deal coverage. Through our 5 flagship funds, we have built a portfolio of over 200 companies with asset under management of $600 million USD in Japan. In addition to these flagship funds, we have just started a growth fund with $150 million USD in this June. According to Prekin, our flagship Japan funds with a vintage of 2010, 12, and 15 are within the first quartile performance globally. Besides Japan, we have been expanding the operations globally for the past 5 years by setting up IF India, IF US, IF Brazil, and have invested about 70 startups in total. We aim to build a strong seed and early stage tech investment community and network from Japan. Next, I would like to introduce some selected portfolio companies as a showcase of what kind of the business opportunities are in Japan market. In B2B SaaS space, we have invested in Sansan, business card-based CRM SaaS company, which is now valued at 2.7 billion USD in the market. We also have invested in Medley, is the largest telemedicine platform in Japan. The both went public in 2019. In the fintech space, we have invested in a company called WealthNavi, the #1 robo-advisor company, which went public last year. Also invested in Bitflyer, the largest cryptocurrency exchange company in Japan. In medical and healthcare arena, we have invested in a company called AI Medical, AI-based medical device company, to analyze endoscope image data, and also invested in Synthetic Gestalto, AI-based drug discovery company. In the area of the deep tech, we have invested in iSpace, a space tech company developing an autonomous lander and rover searching for lunar resources on the moon. Also invested in Pixie Dust, a deep tech company to control ultra-thin sound waves, which is found by Professor Yoichi Ochiai. Incubate Fund has been investing all of these companies from day one together with the founder, and then we keep supporting this company until growth stage and IPO and after. Next, related to today's topic, I would like to talk about a new trend. By using the case studies I recently working on, the trend is the rise of overseas investors in Japan. The majority of the money raised for our newly set up growth fund has come from the international financial institutions like US Endowment Fund, Asian Fund of Funds, Asian Sovereign Fund, Asian Tech Investment Broker, US Multi-Asset Management Company, Asian Family Office. They invest in IF Growth Fund to cultivate the opportunity created by Japan's tech startups. Woven Technologies, our portfolio company, has successfully raised funds from the notable international investors like Taiwan Capital Management, Empower Partners, which is led by Kashi Matsui-san, and an asset management company in the United States. The founding history, which is created by the seed stage VC as initially, like Incubate Fund and the BIZ, followed by Japanese VCs, Nissay Capital, SBI, and corporate VCs like Top One and Mynavi, and then led by the global investors, Eight Roads, Taiwan, and Empower to accelerate this further growth is really the interesting trends we see in Japan market. These things are happening for the first time in my VC career for the past 20 years. I believe that we are seeing more and more crossover activities and inclusion among startups and VC geographically from now. Next, I pick up the 5 reasons why tech startups in Japan has huge potential. First, that we have world-class researchers and institutions. In the 21st century, Japan has produced the second highest number of Nobel laureates in the natural science, behind only the United States. And these researchers are gradually entering into the startup world. Second, we have a deep B2B SaaS market. The IT solution market itself is forecast to be worth $44 billion by US dollar by 2022, with the cloud vertical alone surpassing $94 billion US dollars. Japan's SaaS market itself is currently larger than those of China, India, Australia, and ASEAN countries and the market combined, according to Forrester Research. Third, we are seeing a lot of the government-led deregulations. The Japan's government has been supportive for innovations and aggressively been deregulating new business domains such as aerospace, mobility, telemedicine, cryptocurrency, and ESG and SDGs, etc. And also there is a constant exit environment. Japan has strong IPO market. Tokyo Stock Exchange Motherboard is generating 50 to 60 IPOs of VC-backed companies every year. Also, the size of top 10 company on the mother market, pitch capitalization is about a range from the 2 to 9 billion USD. It's quite a size. Finally, number 5, that we have politically and economically stable society. Japan has the world's third largest GDP, having the political stability on both the international and domestic fronts, and also the having stable domestic market for both B2C and B2B demand. There is an abundance of technology talents and researchers, also having IPO on the M&A market that supports constant exits. Finally, I would like to cover Japan's tech startups in the global startup ecosystem towards 2030. Peter Diamandis, a founder and the chairman of the X Prize Foundation and the Singularity University, predicts the future in 2030. He said the convergence of these key technologies will change business, industry, and life faster than we think. These technologies are quantum computing, AI, networks and 5G, sensors, robotics, virtual reality and augmented realities, 3D printing, blockchain, material sciences, biotechnology. I believe Japan could be one of the suitable places in the world to converge such technology in one place, considering the historical background of the technologies which has been very strong in Japan, like quantum computing, robotics, VR and AR, and material science, etc. Japan's tech sector and tech startups would be able to contribute more to the global startup ecosystem and the society towards 2030. Through my VC investment activity in the United States, India, and Southeast Asia, I strongly feel the amount of VC investment in Japan is very undersupplied. And there are not enough connections between VC and tech startup in Japan and global. Let's dream a common, exciting future driven by converging technologies and do more collaboration towards 2030. Thank you very much.
Next, we welcome Ms. Matsui to give her speech. Thank you, Ms. Matsui.
Hello, my name is Kathy Matsui. I am a co-founder and general partner of Empower Partners, a newly launched venture capital fund here in Japan. What is unique about Empower Partners is we are Japan's first ESG-focused venture capital fund, E standing for environment, S for social, and G for governance. Our mission is to help startups integrate these critical ESG values as part of their core business strategies to enable them to scale and grow globally. I'd like to start off my comments by sharing with you why I decided to start such a fund in the first place. My background is 30 years in Japan's financial industry, focused on public equities, not startups. And I've conducted a lot of research in my career on issues pertaining to ESG-related matters, such as why good corporate governance is necessary, or why better gender diversity can help drive growth. But after years of speaking with large companies and executives of listed companies on these topics, I came to the realization that there's a huge opportunity to instill these critical ESG values in Japanese startups before they become public, before they're set to really take off in their growth trajectory. To me, it was part and parcel of a company's long-term sustainable growth strategy to focus on these ESG principles. The second reason I began to want to start this enterprise of investing in Japanese startups is, as a Japanese American living in Japan for over 30 years, I've come to realize that Japan's private market or startup market is filled with tremendous hidden gems. And finally, in the last few years, the investment community has woken up to this exciting opportunity. So for instance, Japan's venture investing market has actually grown 7-fold in the last 7 years. So exponential growth. Having said that though, relative to the size of its economy or relative to GDP, Japan's venture market is still just 1/35th that of the US and 1/18th that of China. So huge potential ahead. Another very interesting fact we found was that if you take venture capital investment returns, median net internal rates of return for Japanese VC funds with vintages between 2010 and 2014, and compare them with their US peers, we found that in fact, the median IRRs of Japanese venture funds was delivering between 15 and 30% on average. In other words, quite comparable to the returns that one would find for similar funds in the US market. But why is the market in Japan therefore so small? And one reason we believe it's not yet met its full potential is because there is not enough capital being provided, particularly at the later stages of growth for these startups. 95% of VC funds in this country are focused on early stage. Our fund, for instance, is focused more on the later stage. Why? Because the funding rounds on average are growing year over year. It's very common to see funding rounds in excess of 10 million US dollars, which was almost unheard of in Japan a few years ago, and now has become commonplace. The other reason I think it's very exciting for the timing of Japanese venture investing now is because the human capital flow is also shifting. I used to work at Goldman Sachs, and it was quite unusual to see employees or colleagues leave Goldman to enter the startup community. But that has definitely changed in the last few years. Quite a number of people, not just from investment banks, but from major consulting firms, are discovering that there's a whole exciting market out there that needs really high quality talent, whether it be CFOs or CTOs or CPOs. That talent pool is finally beginning to shift out of these very large established corporations into Japan's startup community. And that is super exciting for us to observe. And of course, with that, we think will become the ability for Japanese startups to scale even further. And the final comment I'll make is that, very interestingly, Japanese startups have begun to attract the attention of major global capital and global investors. So for example, in the first 6 months of this year, if you look at the IPOs that have launched in Japan, I believe over a third, close to 1/2 of the capital provided actually came from non-Japanese investors. So it seems to me that if you look at the flow of capital, the flow of human talent, the macro environment that is ripe for a very exciting next growth stage for Japanese ventures, I strongly believe we are at a critical and exciting inflection point for the Japanese venture ecosystem. Thank you very much.
I trust you enjoyed today's presentations. As we heard from everyone who spoke in today's sessions, Japanese startups are becoming increasingly more active. Also, we are seeing progress in the formation of startup ecosystem where VC, large corporations, universities, research facilities, government, and others can interact. The Japanese government is also boosting support for startups, promoting overseas expansions of Japanese startups, and inviting foreign investors and entrepreneurs to Japan. An example is the new startup visa, which provides a maximum 1-year residence permission for foreign entrepreneurs receiving startup support from local public entities. The initiative aims to further enhance the startup ecosystem by attracting foreign entrepreneurs. We hope that everyone who attends today's conference will consider collaborating with Japanese startups and related players. This brings day 1 of our program to an end. Day 2 of Global Startup Connection will begin at the same time tomorrow. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Thank you for your attention today.